This was an unexpected honor to be invited to present, and so I haven't made any special changes or extra changes to my original presentation, Byzantine Zodiacal Iconography as Theological Hermeneutic, apart from adding at the bottom of the title slide the fact that it's repeated tonight. Now, just a bit of background. While I have my own career, and this is my 30th year as an academic, I have started a new PhD, my second PhD project with the University of Sydney in Studies in Religion in 2021, and I hope to finish this year, all going well. And this presentation is sort of part of my project in that it summarizes certain aspects of that research. Kath was kind enough to share, to forward to you a journal article I published last year, and pretty much this presentation is based on that article. So whoever would like to know more can read that article. But there are some patristic examples that I added to this presentation, which weren't part of the initial article. Okay, so this is a topic that might sound a bit strange. Theologically speaking, most Christian traditions cringe when the topic of astrology or the zodiac pop up in conversation. And I have to confess here that initially when I started to think of this topic, I had serious doubts. Should I go for it or not? And then I realized that it was just my ignorance that sort of made me reluctant to address it. And I hate ignorance. I'm, if you like, a distant disciple of Clement of Alexandria, a second century tremendous theologian, thinker, you name it, scriptural exegete, and so on and so forth. And I learned from him that what's at hand for us, people with some brains in our heads, is to fight ignorance and to fight fear and so on and so forth. And I realized all through these years working on this project that the zodiac isn't necessarily related to astrology, and that astrology itself doesn't have to go to those trivial matters of reading one's horoscope while taking the coffee in the morning or stuff like that. So I want to make this clear from the outset. You won't be hearing tonight anything about horoscopes and foretelling and stuff like that. What I'm doing and what my project is about is to showcase this strange development in Byzantine iconography, zodiacal motifs, which actually got amplified after the fall of Constantinople in the so-called post-Byzantine era. And one of my main interests is in making sense of what could have prompted the Byzantines to go against the custom of sort of favoring astrology and making room even in their canonical iconography for zodiacal representations. And therefore, I'm looking at various cultural factors that led towards that point after the 12th century, when this kind of iconography emerged, at least in Byzantium. It emerged a little earlier in the West, during Charlemagne's time, actually. But I'm not interested in tonight anyway in that history of zodiacal representations. What you see on this second slide are some of the main illustrations that I'll be using tonight. The first known to me, at least, zodiacal representation, 14th century, Lesnovo in Serbia, nowadays Serbia. So it's the left side, left hand, whatever image. Then next to it, the Probota one in Romania, 16th century, and then two later representations, one in Georgia at Svetitskoveli, 17th century, and also that century in the Kulu in Greece, another representation. It's a bit of a history in this arrangement of images. It's not that the chronology, there's a development of a theme. Perhaps you can see from the separation of the zodiac from the image of Christ at Lesnovo towards centralization of the composition at Probota with Christ in the middle there, surrounded by the zodiacal signs. And then this more, let's call it canonical or final version of the representation or the motif in Georgia and Greece, with Christ surrounded by circles of various beings, cosmic regions, if you like. But we'll get to some details later on. So a bit of introduction here. It's interesting to know that for many early Christian and Byzantine theologians, the sciences, the scientific culture of that time wasn't something that had to be isolated from the body of the faith, from the church. The scientific culture was part and parcel of their daily routine, and therefore many such theologians accommodated data from the natural sciences, including astronomy and, if you like, astrology. However, they rejected the use of astrology for trivial pursuits such as horoscopes, although later in the Byzantine era, roughly from the 11th century onwards, the Byzantines paid more and more attention to this trivial use of the zodiac, with many known examples of emperors, patriarchs, high nobility having their personal horoscopists, or whatever they are called, astrologers, who would make the horoscope for them, and that was somehow for guidance in the everyday life. And of course, this was always an aspect of the zodiacal culture, so to speak, that the Byzantines officially shunned. However, the zodiac was accepted in theology and spiritual writings, in the liturgical mentality of the church, if you like, for spiritual purposes, where it played a role, a theological function in the interpretation of reality. And perhaps you remember at least one of the images beforehand from the Kulu and Svetitskoveli in Georgia, with Christ being at the center of the zodiac, at the center of reality. So it was an opportunity for these theologians to represent in images what they already had in theology, a Christ-centered universe. So their interest in natural philosophy, this is how the sciences were known as, especially in the astral sciences, fostered the integration of these sciences, including the zodiac, into the wider Byzantine culture. And this development, including of science education, was sponsored by both church and state. Something that perhaps not many of you know, a bit of history here. The Byzantines had an imperial university established in the 9th century it existed, if you like, on and off, and it's the same with the patriarchal school, some kind of ecclesiastical university, a Sydney College of Divinity, if you like, and again, it existed on and off. For further details about science education in Byzantium, you see there a book chapter, Science Teaching and Learning Methods in Byzantium. What's interesting, as a result of this theological integration of the natural sciences, including the astral sciences, including the zodiac, was immediately obvious before the rise of zodiacal iconography in church architecture, in other iconographical representations. In church architecture, perhaps some of you know, traditionally Christian churches were strictly oriented north-south, west-east. Yeah, so they built these monuments, these Christian temples, with a geographical and cosmic, if you like, scope. They were a representation in miniature of the universe. And you'll see in iconography quite earlier on, and my article that came together with the slides of this presentation give you examples from, I think, as early as the 5th century of all sorts of stellar motifs or astral motifs in early Christian iconography. And one might ask what could have prompted this interest. For one, I think it's important to remember that the Christian doctrine of creation became a staple of theological thinking very early on for polemical, pastoral, missional reasons. Christians had to define their own worldview in conversation, more or less friendly conversation with their antagonists mainly. One of the mainstays of this worldview was the doctrine of creation. This centrality of the doctrine of creation translated very early on in a plethora of early Christian theological and exegetical engagements of the days of creation in Genesis 1, which, for example, in the previous rabbinic tradition wasn't such a prominent fixture. Yeah, so if you like, early Christians invented the whole days of creation, doctrine of creation story, you know, which is interesting to think from the viewpoint of the history of exegesis, at least. This fascination with the doctrine of creation and cosmology led to an increasing developing interest in the books of Genesis and the Psalms, sometimes Job, but it's perhaps strange to us, but there's a whole cosmology based on the Psalms, for example, in the 4th century in Athanasius of Alexandria. Yeah, but also other passages such as John 1 and Colossians 1, usually interpreted as a Christ-centered take on the first word of Genesis in Hebrew, Bereshith. Yeah? In the beginning, usually these early Christian interpreters looked at that word not as meaning sometime, meaning someone. In other words, the Logos in John, Christ the Arche, the head of creation in Colossians 1. Anyway, this led to this development of cosmological thinking and cosmological contextualization of the entire Christian experience in early Christianity. This makes sense in terms of the theological engagement of natural philosophy, astral sciences, including the zodiac, from very early on, 2nd century at least, if not already in the first generation after the apostles, the first apostles, till very late in the tradition. And I have, two exemplifications from the same author. One of the grands, if you like, of the Middle Byzantine era, Saint John of Damascus, who lived in the 8th century. And this is a passage from the first part of his trilogy, on the sources, if you like, about the sources. And this is called Philosophical Chapters, Kephalea Philosophica. A sample of, let's call it scientific discourse coming from the plume of a theologian. Time is a measure of motion, and the number of the prior and posterior motion. Day is the period of time during which the sun passes over the earth. So it's descriptive, very descriptive. A month is the space of time between one conjunction of the moon with the sun and the next conjunction. A year is the time it takes for the sun to pass through the cycle of the zodiac. Well, this is because for John and his peers within the tradition, the Christian experience did not happen in the ivory tower of purism. It happened within reality, the bosom of reality, within the world. No wonder they needed a description of the world in order to make sense of their own, let's call it, spiritual quest within the world. Another example from the same author, the second or the third part of the trilogy, exact exposition of the Orthodox faith, or Orthodox faith for short. There are 12 signs of the zodiac made up of the stars in the heavens and having a motion contrary to that of the sun, the moon, and the 5 other planets. And the 7 pass through these 12 signs, which is observational, if you like. Yeah. This is what happens when you look up, you take your time and look up at the sky, and there are no clouds as we had in Sydney for 2-3 weeks. You see the equator of the sky, and this cavalcade or whatever procession of the constellation of the zodiac, and you see how the sun, the planets, the moon cross that equator, and so on and so forth. Doesn't matter. But he describes, if you look further down in the passage, he describes when the sun enters various constellations, and so on and so forth. This is wonderful stuff because it shows that Christians aren't supposed to stay away from the world. Christians are supposed to embrace it, to find their home here. They are sojourners, they are travelers towards the kingdom to come, but also inhabitants of this gift, God's creation, and so on and so forth. Anyway, but for me, this is fascinating stuff. These are 2 examples of representing the science of the time. While the first example from Sinai Codex is a 12th century manuscript of the work Christian Topography by I think 5th or 6th century author Cosmas Indikoplevstis. Cosmas had a very strange way of representing the universe like a box, but he was fair enough, and he also depicted how his contemporaries were representing the universe. And what you see there with the bluish circle is the universe of Ptolemy of Alexandria, the famous astronomer, 2nd century astronomer, who established a way of representing reality, a cosmography, if you like, that was geocentric. What's there in the middle of those concentric circles is the Earth. And then you see the various objects visible from the Earth, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, what's that? Jupiter, I think. Yeah, Theos. And the other one should be Saturn, I assume. Yeah, Cronus. And then you see the cycle of the zodiac. So our microcosm, what we call today the solar system, is embraced by the cycle of the zodiac. And what's interesting in this manuscript, alongside the names of the 12 constellations, there are also the months when they are visible from Earth. What you see there, an earlier representation, Vaticanus Graecus, 9th century. What's interesting about this one, it's paradoxical. On the one hand, this is a manuscript of Ptolemy's tables, calculations, and so on and so forth. But what you see here is more of a heliocentric representation, because the individual with a chariot and 4 horses there is actually the sun. It's an anthropomorphic representation of the sun. So this is against Ptolemy. Ptolemy believed that the sun orbits the earth. It doesn't matter. And what you see all around, 12, 12, 12. The months of a year, constellations, and again the zodiac. But these are just, let's call them, scientific representations or illustrations of the ancient universe. And these led to the theological integration or representation of this so-described reality by way of zodiacal iconography later on. Because my time flies, I just point out the importance of this beautiful edited collection of contributions edited by Stavros Lazaris, a companion to Byzantine science. You can see a lot of good stuff there about all sorts of forms of scientific research inquiry in Byzantium. And the most relevant contribution there is by Anne-Laurence Codano, Astronomy and Astrology, where you'll find a lot of stuff with the main players of Byzantine astronomy and astrology. Okay, I think I'll skip this one. It's just a matter of pointing out the fact, briefly, the fact that a tremendous intellectual of the 11th century, Michael Psellos, Platonist thinker, but also someone who was interested in alchemy and horoscopes and astrology and so on and so forth. And almost a century after, a patriarch of Constantinople, Luke Christovergis, were very much into astrology of the wrong side, so to speak, so much so that the patriarch was always attacked by crowds of monks who accused him of heresy and so on and so forth. It doesn't matter. But this shows that in reality, the interest in the astral sciences developed throughout the Byzantine era, despite all sorts of historical vicissitude. And it should not come as a surprise that the emperor, I keep forgetting his name, an emperor in the 12th century built a monastery in Constantinople, Pantocrator Monastery, nowadays known as Zeyrek Cami. It's a Turkish mosque now. And at the entrance in the church, in the atrium, there's this image of the zodiac per se, no theological qualification. This drove the monks of the monastery mad, rebelled against the abbot, rebelled against the patriarch, and of course the emperor. And they kept renewing decade after decade all sorts of anathemas against astrologers, including patriarchs and emperors. But what's interesting is that with this first appearance of the zodiac within a sacred precinct in a Constantinopolitan church, rolls the ball, if you like, of this process of theological interpretation of the zodiac that is illustrated by those images I have presented earlier. So getting closer to these images, the less novel one, it's the earliest I could find, where you see this theological reinterpretation of the astronomical world, scenery, including the zodiac. But you see two different worlds. Christ in the center there, surrounded by angelic beings. That's the spiritual universe. On the other side, you have the zodiac, which is the material universe, the visible celestial sphere or whatever, with the an anthropomorphic representation of the moon to the left upper corner, the sun blaze of fire there to the left, held in hands by a zodiacal sign, and then the zodiac, and at the bottom there, the grayish series of concentric circles. Those are the planets. Yeah, it's let's call it the immediate universe. Yeah. But what's interesting in this representation is that the two worlds, visible and invisible, are separated. Well, that's not the case in the next example, almost 2 centuries after, where you have Christ in the center there. There's a circle, there's a whatever square, and left and right, the zodiacal signs, and then beyond that, all sorts of angelic beings and saints and so on and so forth. Again, an entire universe, but this time round, uh, the zodiac is no longer separated from Christ. It's part and parcel of the universe. And if I can push a bit the interpretation further, at the center of reality, it's Christ. Only in this case, the whole composition is the Ancient of Days. The other one was Psalms 148, 150, Psalms of Praise. Um, Surrounded by the astronomical universe, the physical universe, represented by the zodiac, and then the sun and the moon, again represented anthropomorphically, if you see there towards the end of the scroll, and then the angelic universe, the invisible, comes after. But then with the Kulu and other churches, we see a return to the less novel representation. So again, this is the Psalm of Praise. Perhaps you see Christ is in the center there with the effigies or the symbols of the four evangelists. And there's a circle of whatever squares. It's actually a scroll and written in Greek there. Psalm 150, verse 6, and the first verse of 148. So may all the soul or the whatever creation praise the Lord, and so on and so forth. Let the heavens celebrate and stuff. And then you see the entire universe orbiting Christ. Again, angelic beings next to Christ, and then the next circle, the zodiacal signs, and those whatever plated ropes maybe look like waves, and the interpreters, the exegetes, aren't clear as to what they mean. Or so waves of the ocean, or some kind of margin of the universe, if you like, and then all around various populations on Earth. A similar representation at Cardamili, also 17th century. This is almost identical to the previous one at the Kulu. The difference being in the representation of the zodiacal signs, there are some slight differences there. And the Georgian one, again, the same, let's call it canonical theological reinterpretation of the zodiac, the same kind of Christ in the center, angels, zodiac, and all sorts of populations praising the Lord. And what's interesting is that the churches, so arrayed, so adorned, are like a miniature representation of the universe. Just remember the fact that these churches are usually oriented, north, south, east, west, and it all looks like a whole universe represented within, so much so that the churches become, um, paraphrasing the Our Father in Matthew 6:10, as in heaven, so on earth. So what's the whole deal with these zodiacal representations? And I conclude by pointing out the fact that there's a triple purpose to this iconographical motif or motifs associated with the zodiac. It's on the one hand theological interpretation of the starry sky as understood by the available sciences, then an implicit illumination of scriptural narratives like the sounds of praise, and theological treatises from the viewpoint of the available sciences, with or without the text being present, and also a pastoral way of taming the Byzantines' enthusiasm for the astral sciences to avoid the return of ancient nature worship. Hence, the significance of having Christ represented in the middle of the zodiac as the center of reality. Well, that's where I leave it.
Thanks so much, Doru. I've personally found that so fascinating in a number of respects. The John of Damascus quote could have been a quote from the Italian physicist Carlo Rovelli in his book, The Order of Time, where he argues pretty much the same thing. And I was fascinated to see that what's the 9th century Vaticanus Graecus is basically a pre-Copernican representation of the sun
Yeah.
centrality of the solar system. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, well, look, we have this idea that the ancients were geocentric. No, Ptolemy in the 2nd century invented geocentrism, and before him there were various models at work, and most Greeks, for example, before the Christian era, were heliocentric.
Yeah, I think the only Lactantius, 4th century, was the only church father who believed in a flat Earth kind of. Anyway, I guess that's a separate issue. But
Oh, no, no, no. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, there were a few eccentrics in the Christian tradition. Lactantius is one, and then the other one from the East is Cosmas, as I mentioned.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left. Questions, comments for Doru?
I'm usually met with this kind of
Father,
response.
Father,
Yes, Father.
hello.
Hello.
I want to ask about the first manuscript of the Greecus, Vaticanus Graecus. There are two groups of people around the sun. 12, then another 12. Are there the 12 tribes and then the other 12 are the apostles?
Oh, well, I haven't looked at it so seriously, actually. I'm less interested in manuscripts, although I mentioned manuscripts. Uh, so I'll have to
There's
read these.
a photo you put
Yeah,
in the
I know what you mean,
presentation.
but
Mm.
I haven't read closely, and I haven't found or looked for an interpretation of this
Because
particular.
we have the same drawing in our monastery here in Red Sea in St. Anthony.
Could be apostles. Look,
Mm.
I'll take a magnifying glass and read the inscription, and I'll send you the result. But definitely, you have the zodiac is the outer circle, and then the next one, the months of the year, so the 12 months. Yeah, you're right. There's another bunch of people there, but because they are naked, I don't think they are apostles.
Okay.
So they must be some deities or whatever.
I
Okay.
don't know, Dora. They could have been merely sunbaking. But I do have a question for you. Do you extrapolate your work in iconology and their link with the sciences as a hermeneutical principle to looking at science and theology today in the world of art as a hermeneutical principle?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. As a matter of fact, thank you. As a matter of fact, my expertise, unacknowledged perhaps, is science-engaged theology. This is where I see myself working, and most of my work, my published outputs are in that area of faith and science or science-engaged theology. And yeah, actually, this is one of the reasons for which I took the challenge of working on this project, because at least in my church tradition, perhaps in many others, there's reluctance towards engaging the sciences. You know, everything is demonic, everything is misleading, and so on and so forth. We know the pandemic and all that. And my intention is to show, at least to people that have some respect for the Byzantine tradition, that's the Orthodox of whatever Eastern Orthodox churches, that it's traditional to engage the sciences rather than staying away from them. That's my plan.
Thank you.
We've got time maybe for one more question, if it's brief. Go for it, Christine.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed that. I have a question. So obviously this is a acknowledgement of the different spirits and realities in the cosmos. Was there a indication of where the Holy Spirit was in all of this, in that Byzantine?
This iconography, you mean?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
look, there are, if you look closely, you'll see the dove. And this shows that it was actually a deliberate theological undertaking to interpret whatever they inherited from the classical culture, from the sciences that kept developing, actually, even in Byzantium and in the West. You know, the so-called Dark Ages was a very bright time for science, philosophy, logic, and so on and so forth. The churches felt challenged to do something about the integration of this new knowledge that was generated into the, let's call it, theological worldview. And therefore, there are representations, even Trinitarian representations, in this cosmic, if you like, setting. So not only the Holy Spirit or Christ, the entire Trinity is at the center of reality. But my project has to do with the Christ-centered universe. So this is why I haven't chosen other examples. But yeah, you're right. And they were very clear, actually. In this theological interpretation via images and theological discourse, they did not succumb to astrology, horoscopes, and that. No, they tried to correct, for pastoral reasons, they tried to correct certain movements, trends within society.